I want you to imagine something for a moment. You are a parent. It is a Tuesday morning. Your daughter is putting on her school uniform. The one she always complains is itchy around the collar. She grabs her backpack, the colorful one with the cartoon characters on it that she picked out herself at the market 2 summers ago. She eats breakfast quickly, tells you she is nervous about a test today, and runs out the door. You call after her. Be careful, come home early. She waves without turning around, the way children do when they are already thinking about something else. She never comes home. Not because of a car accident. Not because of an illness. Because a missile, fired from an aircraft you never saw, controlled by people who did not know your daughter existed, as part of a military campaign targeting a weapons facility 3 kilometers from her school, struck that school building and collapsed it in seconds. 165 people died in Minab on February 28, 2026. Most of them were children. Most of them were girls. Most of them were sitting in classrooms, taking tests, learning to read and write and do mathematics, completely unaware that the first day of Operation Epic Fury, the American-Israeli military campaign against Iran, had begun that very morning. They had no warning. There were no sirens. There was no evacuation. There was just the sky, and then there wasn't. This is the story that the architects of this war do not want to be the story. They want the story to be nuclear facilities destroyed, missile programs degraded, regime changed. They want the narrative to be strategic success, limited casualties, precision strikes, mission objectives met. But the story of Minab will not stay buried under press briefing language and satellite imagery of destroyed weapons bunkers. It is a story written in 165 names. And those names demand an accounting. Let me give you the facts, precisely and carefully, because precision matters here more than in almost any other story this war has produced. The Shajareh Tayyebeh Girls Elementary School is located in Minab, a city of approximately 100,000 people in Iran's Hormuzgan province, in the far south of the country near the Strait of Hormuz. Minab is not a military city. It is not a nuclear research center. It does not contain IRGC missile batteries or command and control facilities of any strategic significance. What it does contain, near the school, is a military installation, a base that was, apparently, on the target list for Operation Epic Fury on day 1. At some point on the morning of February 28, 2026, the very first day of the campaign, a missile struck the area. According to BBC News, which broke the story with an initial death toll of at least 153, the school building was destroyed. As rescue workers, volunteers, local emergency services, ordinary citizens with their bare hands, spent hours pulling bodies from the rubble, the toll continued to climb. Al Jazeera updated the figure to 165 dead. The majority of the victims were the girls who attended that school, along with some teachers and staff. NPR then published something that made an already horrifying story significantly worse. Using commercially available satellite imagery and the analysis of weapons experts, NPR reported that the strike had not simply hit the school. It had hit multiple buildings in the surrounding area. The school was not the edge of a blast radius. It was in the center of an impact cluster. This detail matters enormously because it changes the nature of the incident. If the school was on the edge of a strike targeting a legitimate military facility, that is a tragedy of proximity. If the school was in the center of a strike cluster, the questions about target selection become much harder to dismiss. The UN Human Rights Office did not dismiss them. In a formal press release published by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN experts expressed what they called profound shock and grief at the attack, describing it as a deadly strike on a civilian educational facility and calling for a full, transparent, independent investigation. The UN has not made a formal war crimes referral at the time of this recording, but the language of their condemnation is the language that precedes such referrals. Now, what have the United States and Israel said about this? The U.S. military, when asked about the Minab school strike at a Pentagon briefing, said it was looking into reports of the incident. That phrase, looking into reports, is a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion. It neither confirms nor denies. It implies that the military does not yet have information about an event that killed 165 people and has been covered by every major news organization on the planet. It buys time. And in the world of military press relations, buying time often means running out the clock until the news cycle moves on. The Israeli Defense Forces were more direct in their non-answer. A spokesperson said the IDF is not aware of a strike on the school. Not aware. Note the specific language. Not, we did not strike the school. Not, our weapons systems were not in that area. Simply not aware. It is the kind of statement that technically cannot be proven false, because you can always claim a lack of awareness, while simultaneously creating a false impression of innocence. Then came CNN. CNN's investigative journalism team spent days conducting what they described as a forensic investigation of the Minab strike. They analyzed footage from the scene. They obtained and analyzed fragments of weapons components recovered from the rubble. They consulted with weapons identification experts who have spent careers analyzing the physical signatures of different missile systems. They cross-referenced the trajectory evidence with known U.S. strike patterns documented on the same day in the same region. And they published a conclusion that has not been successfully challenged as of this recording. The United States military was likely responsible for the strike on the Shajareh Tayyebeh girls' elementary school. Likely responsible. Two words that carry the weight of 165 deaths. The White House has not responded formally to CNN's investigation. There has been no statement from the National Security Council. There has been no press briefing directly addressing the question of American military responsibility for the deaths of over 150 children. The silence is itself a form of communication. To understand how this could have happened, you need to understand the scale of what Operation Epic Fury actually was. When we say military campaign in the abstract, it is easy to picture something clean and precise. A few carefully chosen targets, surgical strikes, minimal collateral damage. That is the language the Pentagon uses. That is the language press releases use. That is not what 900 strikes in 12 hours looks like. The Institute for the Study of War confirmed in their special report from February 28, 2026, that Operation Epic Fury involved over 900 individual strike events in the first 12 hours of the campaign alone. 900 in 12 hours. That works out to 75 strikes per hour, more than one per minute, continuously, across a nation of 90 million people and approximately 1.6 million square kilometers. The weapons used included B-2 Spirit stealth bombers delivering precision-guided munitions, F-35 Joint Strike Fighters with their full weapons payload, naval Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from ships in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea, and Israeli long-range ballistic missiles. This was not a surgical operation. To call it surgical would be to abuse the word. This was a strategic bombing campaign of a scale and intensity not seen since the opening days of the Iraq War in 2003. And historical analysis of every major bombing campaign of this nature, every single one, without exception, from World War II through Korea, Vietnam, Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, shows that civilian casualties are not an accident when you strike at this scale and intensity. They are not a failure of the system. They are a predictable, statistically inevitable outcome of the system operating exactly as designed. When you drop that many bombs on that many targets in that many cities in 12 hours, people who had nothing to do with nuclear weapons or IRGC command structures will die. That is not a controversial statement. It is a mathematical one. And yet somehow, the Azadi Stadium in Tehran, a landmark sports venue that has hosted international football matches and has no obvious dual-use military purpose, was also reportedly destroyed in the campaign. Not damaged. Destroyed. The reports of the stadium's destruction sparked an additional wave of international outrage and raised questions about what exactly is on the target list and who approved those targets. A girls' school in Minab. A football stadium in Tehran. These are not hardened military facilities. These are the places where ordinary life happens. The Iranian government's response to the Minab school strike was, predictably, to use it as a powerful propaganda and recruitment tool. State media broadcast footage of the destruction repeatedly throughout the first week of the war. Iran's new supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei, according to multiple reports, cited the school strike specifically in communications calling on Iranians to unite and resist the aggression. The IRGC used the deaths of the Minab school children as justification for escalating their retaliatory attacks on Israeli cities, on Gulf shipping, on American assets in the region. In the brutal arithmetic of wartime propaganda, 165 dead children can be worth many thousands of new recruits motivated by grief and rage. Internationally, the reaction has been growing but divided. The UN condemned the strike formally. Protests emerged in Paris, Berlin, London, and dozens of other European cities, with demonstrators specifically citing the Minab school deaths as evidence that the civilian cost of the campaign had become unacceptable. Human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Médecins Sans Frontières, all published statements demanding accountability and calling for independent investigation. In the Arab world and across the Muslim-majority nations of Asia and Africa, the images from Minab, the collapsed school, the rescue workers, the grief, became symbols of a war that many already viewed with deep suspicion. In the United States, the domestic response has been more muted. News organizations covered the story, but the administration's looking into it response effectively minimized the story's immediate political impact. Supporters of the war argue that Iran bears ultimate responsibility for civilian deaths because Iran chose to pursue nuclear weapons, forcing a military response. Critics argue that the responsibility for every death caused by American weapons is American, regardless of the strategic justification offered for their use. This is one of the oldest moral debates in the history of warfare, and it has never been satisfactorily resolved. Just war theory, which stretches back to St. Augustine in the 5th century and has been codified in modern international humanitarian law, holds that military operations must distinguish between combatants and civilians, must be proportionate to the military objective, and must take all feasible precautions to minimize civilian harm. These are not optional guidelines. They are the binding legal framework under which modern militaries are supposed to operate. Whether a strike that killed 165 children at an elementary school in a city with no obvious strategic military significance satisfies those three criteria is a question that international courts, and the court of history, will eventually be asked to answer. There will be more strikes. There will be more battles. There will be more deaths, some in uniform and some not, some with weapons in their hands, and some with pencils and textbooks. The war is not over. The question of what constitutes an acceptable price for strategic military objectives is not a question that goes away because it is uncomfortable. 165 people walked into the Shajareh Tayyebeh Girls' Elementary School in Minab on the morning of February 28, 2026. They walked in through a door that would not exist by the end of that morning. They sat down in classrooms that would become rubble. They opened books that would never be read again. Their names deserve to be spoken. Their story deserves to be told. And the questions their deaths raise deserve answers that go far beyond looking into it. So I ask you today, directly and honestly, is there a number, a specific body count of civilians, at which the moral case for this war becomes impossible to sustain? Is it 165? Is it 1,000? Is it 10,000? Or do you believe the strategic objective of preventing an Iranian nuclear weapon justifies any civilian cost? There is no easy answer. But the fact that it is a hard question does not mean we get to stop asking it. Leave your answer in the comments. Share this video, because the names of 165 children demand that the world not look away.